Disclaimer. All Harry Potters are equal, but some Harry Potters are more J.K. Rowling than others.
So I did try to get Umbridge to postpone your detention for tryouts last night, Harry,
Angelina Johnson said as Hermione sat down for breakfast. And? Harry said disinterestedly.
Well, she didn't give me detention for asking, but she did try to suggest that you weren't suitable for the Quidditch team. Don't worry, I told her you're the best we've got, but you were right. She's a piece of work. At least your detention's over, Harry, Hermione said. At least, as long as you can control yourself around her.
So you just want me to keep my head down? Harry growled. Like McGonagall?
I want you to choose your battles wisely. Focus on battles you can actually win, and wait and gather information about the ones you probably can't yet.
Harry might have said something in response to that, but Hermione was distracted by the arrival of the Daily Prophet. Though she had little faith in the quality of that rag, she still dutifully scanned it every morning in case there was some major development. But today was not one of those days. The front page story was a fluff piece about the bass player from the Weird Sisters getting married. Hermione, what's that? Harry asked.
Huh? What?
Sturgis Podmore. He pointed at a story on the other side of the page. She turned it over and began to read. Sturgis Podmore had been arrested a week ago for trying to break into a secured area of the Ministry at 1 o'clock in the morning and had just been sentenced to 6 months in Azkaban.
Wasn't he the one who didn't show up to escort us to the train last week? She asked.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Harry said. But 6 months in Azkaban just for trying to get through a door?
That's not so surprising. In the Muggle world, 6 months for trying to break into a top-secret facility would be pretty normal. It's just that Muggle prisons aren't Azkaban.
She shivered.
Reckon he was doing something for the Order? Shh, Ron, not so loud, she hissed. What I want to know is why he refused to speak in his own defense. It could be the you-know-what, but why would Dumbledore be having him do something illegal? I really hope he wasn't Imperious instead. You'd think they'd check for that.
Maybe it's a frame-up, Ron exclaimed.
What? No, hear me out, Ron said. The Ministry suspects he's with Dumbledore, so they lure him down there somehow to find an excuse to arrest him.
Huh. That is scarily plausible, Hermione agreed after a moment's thought.
See, this is why it's good to have a chess master around.
Ron beamed proudly. Harry, however, raised an eyebrow at the two of them. Seems a little far-fetched, don't you think?
Not at all. It's perfectly in line with the Orwellian script Fudge is following.
Orwellian? He said skeptically. Hermione sighed.
No offense, Harry, but you weren't a big reader growing up. I'd loan you my copy of 1984, but I think it might make you a little too paranoid at this point. Fudge already controls the papers. You know that. He set up a kangaroo court to get you expelled from Hogwarts, which was way outside his jurisdiction. And...
She leaned closer and whispered,
And we still don't know who sent those Dementors after you. If they could do that...
She left the thought hanging. That was by far the scariest part for her. Those Dementors could have been feral, or might have been sent by Voldemort, but given the circumstances as she knew them, there was a very real possibility that it was an assassination attempt against Harry by someone inside the Ministry. If they could do that with impunity, then nowhere was safe. Well, another voice said, I calibrated the dosage for all the skiving snack box sweets and their antidotes so that they have useful effects on 1st through 7th years, without a single firstie being sent to the hospital wing. Oh great, more of this, Ron groaned. Fred and George had joined the breakfast table and were still arguing about their testing procedures. Hermione had been helping George with his part, but she was still trying to sway Fred. Well, I discovered that the fever of fudge is stronger in late afternoon, and puking pastiles are more painful than we expected on an empty stomach, George informed his twin. Did you figure that into your dosages? It's not a big enough difference to be important, Fred insisted. And I also tried giving a couple of the firsties one of everything, sweets and antidotes, and they came out just fine.
That doesn't sound right, Hermione cut in. Gapalot's third law states that...
he cut her off. Even if our sweets count as poisons, which they shouldn't, they weren't blended. I gave them one at a time, and the test still worked fine, didn't it?" "Then you fixed the problem with the antidote to the fainting fancies?" George asked. Fred's face fell. "What problem?" "Hermione rigged up a couple of live rat traps to get some rats to test all the antidote combinations. It turns out if you eat a nosebleed nougat and then take the antidote to the fainting fancies by mistake, it makes the nosebleed way worse. It nearly killed the rat when we tried that." "Not to mention the questionable wisdom of skiving off with something you need a friend to give you the antidote for," Hermione muttered. "Wait, you're serious? That combination makes it worse?" Fred asked. "Not surprising, considering the primary effect of the fainting fancy antidote is raising blood pressure," she replied. She had guessed from her parents' medical books that that was the most likely combination to cause problems. Fred was stunned. He clearly hadn't expected any problems like that to show up. Granted, George was pretty surprised too. He was reeling for a while, unsure if they would be able to make production at all, but Hermione eventually nudged him to try to look for a fix. "So, if we'd put them out there as is..." "It could have gone really badly," Hermione said. "Did you at least find a way to fix it, George?" "I'm working on it. I should have it sorted this week." "Okay, that's not too bad," George said, slumping a little and taking a calming breath. "So I'll admit that proves Hermione's point about more extensive animal testing, but it doesn't necessarily prove that testing on the first years is a bad idea." Hermione groaned and dropped her forehead to the table with a soft thud. "Maybe not, but it does prove that you're going about this out of order," George insisted, rubbing her shoulder gently. "The problems Hermione brought up are a bigger deal than getting the dosage exactly right." "Well, sorry for trying to put a good product out on time." "I'm not trying to fight you, Fred." "No, I get it. I made a mistake. I got carried away trying to, make sure we stay in the black. Yeah, it'd be easy if we'd had some money. Let's just try to stay on the same page from now on, and not freak out Hermione." "Fine," Fred said. He looked unhappy to concede defeat, but he'd been backed pretty well into a corner. "So, anyway, while I was testing on the first years, I did find one who has a female puffskein that isn't spayed, and she's willing to breed it." "Really?" George perked up at once. "We can start our breed of midget puffs with a Serrano?" "Yeah, just one thing. It's not a common puffskein. It's a fancy red breed." We'll take what we can get. Besides, it'll match our hair. We're making progress here."
"How long does it take to breed puffskeins?" asked Hermione.
"About a month for pregnancy," George said. "We looked it up. Average litter is 7. You can wean the kits at 1 month, breed them at 4 months, and they can bear 4 to 6 litters a year. About the same as rabbits, really." Hermione began counting on her fingers, month by month. The arithmetic started to get complicated at 8 months or so, but she didn't need to go much further.
She said. "At that rate, you could theoretically turn 2 puffskeins into 277 puffskeins before the beginning of next school year. Of course, you'll need more founders to establish a healthy line."
277? Fred said in amazement. "I think we're in business." "We'll get on that later today," George agreed. "We need to get going soon." "Yeah, no homework this morning, Hermione," Ron said. "We've all got Quidditch practice."
"That's all right."
Ron's jaw dropped. Fred and Harry stopped and stared at her. George and Ginny snickered at them.
"If you paid attention, you'll know that I've got my arithmancy master class with Septima this morning."
"Oh, right," Ron laughed. "See you later, then." Hermione finished her breakfast and headed up to Septima's apartment. This week, Georgina was there with her. Septima's grandniece was friendly enough with Hermione, probably because of the family connection. She was starting her 2nd year, and from what Hermione had heard, had had a pleasantly uneventful first year in Slytherin, at least until the final few days.
"Good morning, Hermione," Septima said when she walked in. "It's good to see you. I hope you don't mind. I invited Georgina to tea. I was just asking her how her first week of classes went." "It was pretty good except for the usual," Georgina said eagerly. "History and defense were boring, but the other classes were interesting." "Well, if your defense class was only boring, you did better than I did," Hermione grumbled. "Oh, did something happen to you?" Septima asked worriedly. "I heard something about Mr. Potter getting detention." "That was what happened," she said. "Harry mouthed off about Voldemort." Eek!
Georgina jumped so high that she knocked over her tea and fell out of her seat.
"Honestly, it's just a name." Not in Slytherin," the younger girl squeaked. "You say his name there and they'll curse you into the hospital wing." "Have you seen that?"
Hermione said in horror. Georgina averted her eyes and fell silent. Hermione remembered the rule she'd mentioned before, that what happens in Slytherin stays in Slytherin. And she might disagree with most of Snape's actions, but as a marked Death Eater, he probably really did have to look the other way on things like that.
"I'll speak with Professor Snape about that," Septima said. "I don't know if anything can be done right away, but it's my duty as a teacher." It doesn't matter, Aunt Septima," Georgina said. "They only need to make an example of one person a year. After that no one's stupid enough to say it again." "Make an example of them?" Hermione exclaimed. "Do you hear what you're saying?"
"Hermione,"
Septima said sternly, "I appreciate your concern, but this isn't the time or place for you to get involved. Now what happened to Mr. Potter?" "Right," she sighed. "Harry was mouthing off about you-know-who being back, and he basically called Umbridge a liar, and she gave him a week's detention. That was a little harsh, but what she did to him—"
Septima raised an eyebrow, and Georgina looked at her seriously.
"What?" Septima asked. "It was—"
Hermione glanced at Georgina.
"It was pretty nasty." "Honestly, I'm 12 years old," Georgina said, with an indignant toss of her hair.
Hermione took a deep breath.
"I know, but Harry didn't want it spread around. We're looking into what we can do about it, but—" "I won't tell anyone, Hermione," she promised.
Hermione thought for a moment and decided she could trust her. Not only had Georgina been friendly with her in the past, but they both knew full well that if this did get out, it would be quickly traced back to her. And anyway, Harry couldn't hide the cuts on his hand forever.
"All right," she said. "Umbridge made him write lines, but not with a normal quill. According to Harry, she has this quill that cuts into your hand as you write, and writes the words in blood."
Septima and Georgina both gasped. They knew better than most that blood magic was widely considered dark.
"It heals your hand after you write, but with enough repetitions. After a combined 18 hours, I mean, it stops healing fully." "That's awful!" Georgina cried.
18 hours? Septima gasped.
"In 4 nights?" 3, 16 in the first 2.
8 hours a night, with that kind of punishment." She looked a little faint. Georgina was turning green.
"That's why he didn't hand in his arithmancy homework, isn't it? He literally didn't have time to do it." "That's right. Harry was in Umbridge's office until 1 o'clock in the morning. I have my ways of knowing."
"Of course you do," she muttered.
"I'm sorry if you don't believe me, but—"
Hermione started.
"No, I believe you." "What? You knew?" she gasped. "No, I didn't know, but I believe you. That's completely within Umbridge's character." "How?" she burst out. "How can they let that woman teach children?" "Because she knows how to work the system, and you will both do well to remember that." "But why hasn't anyone stopped her?" "She's too smart for that. Believe me, I know." She trailed off uneasily. "Septima, what is it?" Hermione asked. Septima looked between the two girls with an implicit plea for discretion and said, "All right, then. I suppose it's only fair I tell you my secret about that woman. Hermione, Georgina, Dolores Umbridge was my roommate for 7 years here at Hogwarts." Georgina's and Hermione's eyes bugged out. That changed their whole perspective instantly. "So you knew her?" Hermione said. "She was an unpleasant girl at 11, and an even more unpleasant girl at 17. Even as a student she was controlling, manipulative, power-hungry, and a consummate tattletale. She loved to manipulate the rules to her advantage, and the more people she had to tear down to get ahead, the better. Fortunately, Professor Slughorn saw right through her and never gave her any real power, but she was still a nasty piece of work. She fit in just fine with all the pure-blood bigots in Slytherin, too." "She's not a Death Eater, is she?" Hermione asked worriedly. "No, she'd never join them. She's too wedded to her ministry job. She likes things the way she's doing them. I'm sure she wouldn't hesitate to use dark magic if she needed to, but her preferred methods are bending the laws and rules to her will and sending the Aurors after anyone who crosses her." "How can she do that?" Georgina asked. "How can she be so mean?"
Septima sighed and looked down at her tea, shaking her head sadly.
"Georgina," she said, "and Hermione, I want you to listen carefully, because this is an important lesson for both of you. Not all villains in this world wear black robes and white masks. Some of them are government bureaucrats in ugly pink cardigans who would rather use the system against people rather than dark curses. And Dolores Umbridge is as expert with that as you-know-who is with the killing curse. She can manipulate the rules to ruin almost anyone, and right now she's set her sights on the hardest target in the country, and she has every intention of winning." "Dumbledore," Hermione breathed. "Yes. Believe me when I say that she is a real threat to Dumbledore's position as headmaster, especially considering she's now in a position to make the rules and not just enforce them. You have to be very careful when the government gets that kind of power." "I understand, Septima," Hermione said. "Muggleborns know a lot about oppressive governments." "Oh?" "We've seen examples that make Cornelius Fudge look like a boy playing at soldiers, but I do appreciate the perspective. I need to know what I'm getting into." "Just so you don't underestimate her. I know you faced a lot of danger in your time, but trust me when I say you do not want to go up against her." "Yes, that's what I've been telling Harry. By the way, is there anything you can do about Harry's homework?"
Septima shook her head.
"No, I'm sorry. I can't change the rules for one person, especially if it's over detention. I might consider bending them, but Umbridge will be watching me too. I don't think she's ever forgiven me for being picked as a prefect over her."
"Lovely," Hermione groaned, and another thought struck her.
"Septima, back in my second year, you told me one of your roommates said she wished the heir of Slytherin would get rid of all the mudbloods."
Georgina squeaked with alarm at the profanity, but Septima just nodded solemnly.
"Yes," she said, "Dolores Umbridge."
Hermione decided to change the subject, and they moved on, although Georgina still complained about her housemates some.
"Of course, Draco Malfoy is swaggering around like he owns the place," she said, rolling her eyes. "And if anyone tells him off for being an arse, he'll try to scare him off."
That didn't surprise Hermione.
"Oh," she said, "did he say something about you-know-who?" "No, but you can tell what he means. But I'm not so worried about him. Astoria and her sister can stand up to him, so I'm all right."
Georgina had befriended a Daphne Greenglass's sister, Astoria, last year. Astoria was a year ahead of her, and if Daphne was any indication, that would put her on the anti-Death Eater axis as much as it was possible in Slytherin. That seemed encouraging to Hermione.
"I met Astoria's sister this week," she told her. "I managed to start an informal study group with her and Tracy Davis." "You did? Daphne's nice, but I didn't think she'd work with a Gryffindor." "Well, a lot of people respect arithmancy skills. You and Astoria can come find me too if you want help. You're both in third-year arithmancy, aren't you?" "Uh-huh, I'll ask her. She might want to meet you if Daphne did." "Great, thanks, Georgina."
So far, so good, Hermione thought. Harry might have tried to put it off a little longer, but at Ginny's insistence, he called Sirius on his mirror right after Quidditch practice. Like any good godfather, Sirius asked him how his week had gone and so forth. Harry glossed over the subject of his detentions, and Sirius gave him much the same response that Professor McGonagall had. "Good on you for calling Umbridge a liar, but don't do it again because it's not worth it." He spent some time talking about his classes and a little more before he explained what had happened with his scar. That made Sirius turn very serious. No pun intended. "You need to tell Dumbledore, Harry," he said. "He doesn't want to bother with me," Harry said. "He'll want to know about this," Sirius insisted. "Harry, Dumbledore means well. I don't fully understand why he's doing what he's doing, but I know he has a good reason. I'm still working him over to try to get him to tell me his plan. To tell you his plan, I should say." "Couldn't be bothered to this summer, could he?" "It's more complicated than that. Dumbledore's walking a fine line between Voldemort and the Ministry. If it seems like he wants you out of the way for now—" "It's because he does," Harry said irritably. "I didn't mean it like that," Sirius said. "You might as well say it." "He's trying to keep you alive and not expelled, Harry. I don't fully agree with his methods, but I would hope we can all agree on those goals. And he needs to know about your scar to do that." Harry could see Sirius's point, but he really wasn't in a mood to admit it, so he just changed the subject. Do you think Umbridge could be possessed, like Quirrell? No, I don't see how she could be possessed by Voldemort, Sirius replied. Voldemort has a body now, and I don't think she's a Death Eater either. Possible, but unlikely. It was probably just a coincidence she was there at the time. Your scar was aching all last year, wasn't it? Yeah, Harry admitted. A part of him actually felt disappointed. It almost would have been easier if Umbridge were with Voldemort, one less enemy to deal with. Dumbledore said it was when Voldemort was feeling a powerful emotion or something like that. Well, there you go. You still need to be careful around her, though. What else can she do? She's already not letting us use magic in class. Not to mention the detentions, he added mentally. She can still try to expel you. Harry had to concede that point. Anyway, I'm not surprised she's not letting you use magic. Our insider sources at the Ministry say Fudge doesn't want you trained in combat. Trained in combat? Harry said. What, he thinks we're going to make an army out of a bunch of kids? It's not as crazy as it sounds, Sirius said. Half the Order was recruited straight out of Hogwarts last time around. It's crazy to think Dumbledore's going after the Ministry, mind, but no one ever said Fudge was sane. Yeah, tell me about it, Harry said. He must have shifted his hand somehow when he wasn't paying attention, because Sirius suddenly noticed it. Harry, what happened to your hand? Nothing, he said quickly, putting his hand farther out of sight. It looked like it was cut up. It's nothing, it's not important. Now, that tone means it really is important. Sirius's parental lie detector was getting pretty good. Sirius, do we really have to do this? Harry pleaded. Yes. I've got it sorted. I'll be the judge of that, Harry. Really? Harry, I'm your godfather, and I need to know if something's wrong with you. Now show me your hand. Harry sighed heavily and showed his hand to the mirror, eliciting exactly the response he expected. After Sirius had stopped swearing, he called a weary-looking Remus over to see. And after he had stopped swearing, Harry was surprised to find Remus swore even more than Sirius. He asked Harry to explain exactly what had happened and considered the problem. I've never heard of a quill that does that before, he said. I can think of a vague idea of how you might make one, but I've never heard of anyone doing it before. I thought she was just a pure-blood supremacist bitch, Sirius growled. I never thought she'd hurt Harry. It's Umbridge. What did you expect? You know her? Harry said. Not personally, thank Merlin, but she hates half-breeds. She's behind all that new anti-werewolf legislation. Wants to have mere-people rounded up and tagged. The works. He growled. We've got to do something about her. Easy, Sirius said. Don't think with Moony, Remus. Whatever we do, we need to make sure Harry isn't expelled. But can you do something? Harry said, a spark of hope appearing for the first time. I don't know. We don't have a lot of room to maneuver. The trouble is, anything we do, the Ministry can try to block it. Let me think. Okay, how about this? Harry, you check the school bylaws and see what it says about corporal punishment. And I'll approach Amelia Bones privately and see if she can do anything. But I'll warn you, pup, Fudge has this locked down pretty tight. There might not be much she can do without risking her job, and she's more useful in the government than out of it. Mind you, you say the word, and I'll push this as far as it'll go, but... No, stopping Voldemort's more important, and I'm not giving Umbridge the satisfaction of losing to her. You don't have to put up with her doing that to you. It doesn't matter. The detentions are over anyway. All right, just try not to get any more, Sirius conceded. We'll let you know if we get anywhere with this. Thanks, guys.
Dear Mum and Dad, so honestly, it's been a long, hard week here at Hogwarts. A lot of things happened that are worth writing about, and I'm just going to take them in chronologically so that I'm not just spewing words incoherently across the parchment. The first night, it turned out that because I left Hogwarts and re-enrolled, I had to be resorted. Don't worry, I went back to Gryffindor, but the sorting hat made a disturbingly good case for me to go to Slytherin instead. The hat sang a long song about the dangers of the divisions between the houses, and how we all need to come together to defeat our enemies. I'm going to try to do my part with that, but it's a slow process at best. We have 2 new teachers this year. Professor Grubbly-Plank was subbing for Hagrid last year, and she's back this year since Hagrid is mysteriously absent. The other one is Professor Umbridge, whom... Hermione had to put her quill down and take a few deep breaths at this point. Whom the Ministry appointed to teach defense. I'm not sure what authority they had to dictate hiring here, and she isn't a very good teacher. To start with, she actually interrupted Professor Dumbledore's welcome speech to make a big political speech that basically boils down to the Ministry wanting things done its way here. In class, she tells us to read from the course book, and that's it. No lecture or demonstration or anything. And even the course book itself I don't think is very good. I really don't think she's adequately preparing us for the OWL exam. And then she gave Harry a week's detention for mouthing off and calling her a liar because she denies Voldemort's back. But now I'm getting out of order, aren't I? Sorry. The school is pretty divided about the Voldemort thing. Out of my roommates, Parvati and Sally Ann believe Harry and Professor Dumbledore, but Lavender and Lily don't. It's really hurting Sally Ann and Lily's relationship, and I had to tell Lavender to shut her mouth the first night. I talked to Septima last weekend, and she's very pleased I still want to do my mastery with her. We think we can make it work even when I go back to France. She gave me some advice about reaching out to the Slytherins without making too many waves, too. I also... Something stopped Hermione here. She hadn't exactly held back from her parents about what she was doing with regard to mapping the school, even if she hadn't quite conveyed how much it was against the rules. But she remembered what Dumbledore said. Owls can be intercepted. She didn't need to tell her parents all the details, and she wouldn't want the enemy finding out about her little security system on the off chance they got a hold of this letter. Got those extra safety measures I mentioned up and running. Meanwhile, George and Fred have been getting a little carried away with their product testing. I tried to rein them in, and it worked with George, but we're still trying to convince Fred. Classes are much more difficult this year because we've gone straight into OWL preparation. Professor Snape threw us all in the deep end even more than usual. Hardly anyone was able to make a decent attempt at this week's potion. I never did find out what became of those complaints I made against him in third year. I'll ask this week. The other classes have been fun, though. We started with vanishing spells and transfiguration, which may have opened up some new avenues of research I want to look into. I'm still worried about Cedric and Cho. I think the shock of what happened last spring really strained their relationship. I'm going to try to talk to them this weekend to see if I can help. But I think I've started to make some new friends. I formed a new study group with Daphne Greengrass and Tracy Davis, who are probably the two most pleasant Slytherins in my year. Anyway, about Professor Umbridge. She gave Harry a week's detention and... Once again, Hermione stopped. Something told her she should maybe hold back here, but it took her a minute to pinpoint it. It probably wouldn't be a good idea to broadcast that she knew about Harry's precarious emotional state. Not when there was a risk of it being intercepted by the enemy. Well, suffice it to say, I'm pretty sure something illegal is going on, and we're looking into what can be done about it. Professor Umbridge seems like a pretty nasty woman. She was Septima's roommate when they were students, if you can believe it, and Septima didn't have very nice things to say about her. Ron made the Quidditch team this year. He's the new keeper, although it sounds like he needs a lot of practice. I hope things are going well with you. Keep me posted on things back at home. Love from Hermione. Hermione took her letter up to the owlery just after leaving Septima's office. Interestingly, she spotted the caretaker, Argus Filch, lurking around the entrance. "Hello, Mr. Filch," she said cheerfully, and waved when she saw him.
"Yeah, and what are you up to?" he demanded with a scowl. "Ordering dung bombs?"
No," Hermione said, confused. "I'm just sending a letter to my parents."
"A likely story."
"What do you mean, a likely story? I've got the letter right here." She showed him the envelope, which read, Doctors Daniel and Emma Granger, 17 Salisbury Road, Crawley, West Sussex. Filch snatched the letter and inspected it suspiciously. "Why would I be ordering dung bombs anyway?" she demanded.
"Given your choice of boyfriend, it wouldn't surprise me."
Oh, so that's what this was about. Filch had been friendly with her since second year, when she figured out a runic array that allowed the squib to brew potions. But he also considered the twins to be his arch-enemies, and he wouldn't appreciate her dating one of them. "Honestly, Mr. Filch, I think I'm a little old for such a juvenile prank," she said, "and I will be trying to keep George and Fred in line while I'm here." Filch didn't reply to that, but he handed back her letter and went on his way.
The Owlery was not a particularly hygienic place, and Hermione tried to spend as little time there as possible. There were owl droppings everywhere, and she was surprised she hadn't managed to take one on her head in the past 4 years, although perhaps magical owls knew to avoid people when they did their business. There really ought to be some charms to keep it cleaner, she thought. At the moment, there was only one other person in the Owlery, Cho Chang.
"Hello, Cho. Nice day,"
Hermione called.
Hermione," she said flatly. Yeah, good Quidditch conditions today."
Cho was affixing a letter and parcel to a barn owl.
"Special occasion?"
Hermione asked, noting the parcel. It wasn't often that someone would be sending a package from school.
"Yes, it's my mom's birthday today. Are you writing home?" "Uh-huh, I always write home every Saturday."
"That's nice of you."
"My parents worry about me, especially after what's happened the last few years here."
Cho grimaced, but she quickly hid it. She finished sending her parcel and left, saying,
"I'll see you around, Hermione."
Hermione sent her owl on its way and hurried to catch up.
"Actually, Cho, I've been meaning to talk to you,"
she said. Cho turned in surprise.
"What about?"
she asked.
"Well, I'm sorry if it's not my business, but how are things with you and Cedric?"
Cho gave a soft squeak and turned away, tears rapidly forming in her eyes.
"Cho?"
Hermione said worriedly.
I don't know," she stammered. "Why?"
"Why?
"Because Cedric is my friend, and I want him to be happy. He told me you'd been distant with him all summer. He thinks you're going to break it off soon."
He does?" she gasped.
"Yes. What is he supposed to think when your relationship is on the rocks for so long? He says he can't even hold a proper conversation with you." I didn't mean to," Cho started again. "He was such a brilliant wizard." "He still is," Hermione cut in. "What's the problem?" "I don't know," she repeated. "I don't want to end it, but I can't bear to look at him like this."
"What?" Hermione demanded.
"What, because of the arm and the leg?"
When Cho continued to give her an uncomfortable silence, she couldn't help herself and started shouting at the older girl.
"What's the matter with you? Cedric survived. He fought a vicious Death Eater and he came out alive. Do you know it was only by a narrow margin that he wasn't killed by Crouch's first spell? It was incredibly brave of him to fight that fight for Harry." I know, it's just... "What?" "He lost his wand hand, Hermione!" Cho yelled back. "Do you realize how awful that is for a wizard? That can't ever be fixed. And it's not a custom or a superstition like the taboo on breaking someone's wand. He'll never be as good a wizard as he was before." "Bollocks!" she said.
There was a brief silence, as if she'd surprised even herself. Sometimes she wondered what was becoming of her vocabulary with all this trouble going on.
"So Cedric's not as good with a wand as he used to be. He's still brilliant, kind, and brave, not to mention he's making a lot of progress casting left-handed. But what he doesn't have, what he needs, is a girlfriend he can count on, one who will stay by his side and help him recover."
Cho was looking more and more uncomfortable, but Hermione didn't let up.
"He still cares a lot for you. Do you know how hard it is for him, you stringing him along like this, refusing to look at him but not coming out and breaking it off?" "Okay, I get it," Cho shouted. I just don't know what to do." "Do you love him?"
Hermione blurted it out without thinking, but it seemed like the right question. Normally, she would have thought it was too forward, but it made sense when she thought about how much Cedric appeared to be hurting. Cho looked almost wounded when she said it. It must have cut deeply, but it definitely brought them to the real point. Cho said, and then she felt silent for a long time, but she finally decided, yes, I do." "Then quit being an idiot and go back to him," Hermione said firmly. "It's not that simple," Cho glared at her.
"Is it?"
she asked.
"Since when are you an expert?" "Okay, yes, I'm new at dating, and I'm not exactly an expert on that, let alone love, I admit it," Hermione answered. "But I do know one thing. Professor Dumbledore says love is the most powerful magic in the world. Maybe it can't fix Cedric's hand, but I know it can overcome a lot more than a couple of missing limbs. If you really are right for him, that is."
"What?" Cho said indignantly.
"Well, if this is how you react, I have to question it. You believe us that Voldemort's back. You know there's a war coming. Things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. A lot of people are going to get maimed or killed or tortured before this is over."
She took a breath to keep the quiver out of her voice. Hermione had thought more than she'd cared to on this over the summer. It was going to be hard. But she shook off her thoughts and pressed on.
"If Cedric can't count on you to stand by him, then he needs better. He deserves better." "I can stand by him," Cho said fiercely.
Hermione raised her eyebrow.
"Really? Because you haven't done such a good job of it so far?" I don't want to lose him," she said. "Now, that much I can believe. But if you really mean that, you need to decide whether you can get over this complex of yours and be there for him properly, because I will not let you hurt him any more."
Cho took a step back. Hermione knew she could be intimidating when she wanted to be.
I'm sorry, Hermione," she said weakly. "I never meant to hurt him. I think I need some time alone."
Cho walked away, and Hermione let her go. She did hope she could get her act together, for Cedric's sake, but she really wasn't sure the girl was up for it. Well, only time would tell. Sunday passed pleasantly uneventfully. Hermione convinced Ron and Harry to do their homework, and was happy to help them out with a rather detailed essay about the moons of Jupiter. She'd had to hold herself back from laughing when Harry wrote that Europa was covered in mice rather than ice. The only unpleasant thing was when Ron received a letter from Percy, of all people, ostensibly congratulating him for becoming a prefect. However, the bulk of the letter was warning Ron to stay away from Harry, given that both he and Dumbledore were under a cloud, and Harry had been in court and got off on a mere technicality.
"As if self-defense is a technicality," Hermione fumed. "Percy was even there in the courtroom."
He suggested that Ron talk to Umbridge, a really delightful woman, if he worried about Harry becoming violent, and alluded to something that was going to appear in the paper the next morning that might threaten Dumbledore's position as headmaster. And then, to top it all off, Percy tried to convince Ron to cut ties with their parents, like he had. Honestly, if Percy were her brother, Hermione might actually send him a howler. Besides deliberately trying to tear apart his own family, she didn't see how anyone could consider Dolores Umbridge really delightful, even if he agreed with her. The mystery of Percy's not-so-cryptic clues was solved when the prophet arrived the next morning and trumpeted right on the front page that Umbridge had been named the Hogwarts High Inquisitor.
"Is that even legal?" Hermione asked. "I thought the Board of Governors had final authority over the school."
Her friends shrugged. It was worth looking into, she thought. She was pretty sure she was right about the board. She'd need to look up the exact legal status of the school, but the board's authority was presumably set down in the school charter. And since Hogwarts was older than the Ministry of Magic, the Wizards' Council, and the Round Table, that is, older than every national governing body for magic, that charter must either have been backed by the estates of the founders themselves, or had been under a royal charter under the Muggle King of Scotland at the time. It would take some research to figure out what the successor governing bodies were, and their relationship with the current ministry. The newest educational decree, number 23, gave Umbridge the power to inspect the other teachers' classes and to determine if they were meeting the ministry's educational standards. Of course, that wouldn't stop her from teaching herself. Hermione didn't disagree that there were a couple of teachers at Hogwarts who weren't up to snuff, but she doubted if she'd listed the same ones as Lucius Malfoy, who was quoted in the article, and she didn't trust Umbridge as far as she could throw her. Meanwhile, Hermione received her usual letter from her parents, but even that seemed a little off.
"Dear Hermione, we're pleased to hear that you're settling back into Hogwarts very well, despite the trouble with your roommates. We hope that you can understand each other better and come to a reconciliation with them. It sounds like you've been very busy. It was a surprise to hear you had to be resorted. Of course, we would be proud of you no matter which house you joined, but just the same, we're glad you didn't go to Slytherin, as it sounds like the students there would be unfriendly with you at best, and frankly, we would have worried for your safety. Speaking of which, we'd like you to refresh our memories a little. What new safety measures does the school need? Is there a reason you can't trust the teachers with them? And what's this about product testing with George and Fred? Are they breaking the rules with what they're doing? If so, we want you to stay out of it. We hope your classes go well and that you are managing your time well. We know this year will be difficult for you, so please let us know if you start to fall behind or fall into a rut like you have before. We know you can do well in all your classes. You just need to pace yourself, make sure you get enough sleep, and talk to someone if something's really bothering you. We were a little concerned about those detentions you mentioned Harry got with the new teacher. Why did you say you think everything is legal? Is there some reason it wouldn't be? We're sure she can't be too bad if the school agreed to hire her. And you said she and Septima were roommates in school? That sounds very interesting. You'll have to tell us more about what she said. We'd love to hear what those two were like as students. Love from Mum and Dad. Hermione put the letter down when she finished it and said, "Okay, that's definitely not right." It was subtle. Her parents had clearly written most of it, but there were little clues that not all was as it appeared. The most telling line was, "Is there a reason you can't trust the teachers with them?" But there were others, too. They seemed inordinately concerned with any rule breaking, and more trusting than usual about the authority figures in the magical world. If this was her first or second year, that would be understandable. But after everything she'd been through, she knew they weren't too confident about the school or the ministry, and they, mostly, trusted her judgment about when the rules needed to be broken. And then there was the fixation with what Septima had said about Umbridge. But the oddest part was that they said she and Harry's detentions were legal. Could they have misread that line? Hermione thought that "pretty sure something illegal is going on" was pretty clear. She didn't see how they could have got that wrong unless someone's been tampering with our mail, she whispered. Rethinking it in that light, it made much more sense. If she had been a normal student, she probably wouldn't have noticed the other slips because they wouldn't have been so far out of the ordinary. And with fewer red flags, she might have chalked up that last one to a simple misreading. But she could tell. Someone had read and changed her letter after she sent it, and had probably changed her parents' letter on the way back. Just enough to encourage her to spill her secrets about her rule-breaking and Septima's bad-mouthing of Umbridge. That line of thought led to one worrying conclusion. The person intercepting her mail wasn't Voldemort. It was Umbridge. At least, that was certainly what it looked like. She needed to find a way to test it for sure without looking suspicious. Luckily, she had a way of passing information without being intercepted.